career path led you to grant administration?
Grant administration wasn't so much a career path as a sojourn, so to speak, that I've been caught up on. I'm a business administration major. Graduated college, went right to Manhattan, started working in Midtown. After being in New York for a little bit, I started my own business. And that brought me back to Washington, D.C. Now, while I was in D.C., I heard from a dean who I spent the majority of my undergrad sort of studying and working under. And months or a year or so back, he had reached out to me and got a chance to talk, and I helped him with some questions he had on the grant. So now I'm back working at the university, back in DC. He stops by my office. He says, "Hey, you know that grant I was asking questions about?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, we ended up getting it." I said, "Okay, well, cool." He said, "And I'd like you to come over to my office and manage it." Dean, I don't know anything about grants. You know, I'm a business admin guy. I'm working in student accounts. So yeah, I get it, but all those things, the grants, we can train you on that. Said, but it's over $2 million. It's a lot of money, and I want somebody I can trust. I said, okay, if you can make things HR-wise happen, and I can just switch over, do what you need to do, sure. Now, there was a nice increase in salary that came with it. That helped for sure, but within a few weeks after that, I was over in his office and had a $2.1 million grant over the next either 3 or 4 years to manage. And that was the career path, and that's what led me into grant administration.
So on that path with that journey you just explained, I guess it's safe to say that gave you a lot of the skills and knowledge and wisdom that you have for your position in grant administration right now.
Not at all.
No?
No, it was a good foundation. But what I learned was that grants in the nonprofit landscape is a completely different world. And what I did was invest a lot of my time and effort in going to conferences and getting certifications. Especially we started getting into federal awards. That was money from a private foundation. At that time, I thought all grants were the same. They're not. And the federal pathway is different, and there's other challenges and obstacles involved in that, which totally different career track and different levels of study and the different grant instruments and so on and so forth. So no, it was a good foundation. What that opportunity presented me with was a great foundation with somebody who knew me as a student and would give me the width, if you will, the time to really learn and grow in that field. It wasn't so much an investment in me and where I was at the time, but more so given exposure and some additional education and training where I could go with it. So, and it did really prepare me for that.
Wow, so that's amazing. We definitely have to circle back for another podcast on the difference in the federal and the other types of grants, because that's something I learned myself. And I'm sure the people want to know more about that, because
We can spend some hours on that alone.
we're definitely going to revisit that. That's another show. But so what was it that made you start the Florida Nonprofit Center then?
Well, the Florida Nonprofit Center, at the time, so fast forward, working with 2 other universities, I had a private research lab that I was over at the time. We're pushing $100 million or so in grant revenue. State of the art, we dealt with research with animals, you name it. All that's really where the full spectrum of grant experience came. But there was also a level of, I wouldn't say high profile, but there was some recognition that came with it. And people started to know, hey, well, he's the guy, he works with grants. Somebody came to me and said, hey, I know a couple, they have some issues with some grants, you're the only person I know in this, can you talk to them, can you help them out? Cool, set up a meeting, I go and I sit with this couple, and great couple, a pastor and his wife, they have a church, the church has a building, they're trying to do this program for women, fantastic. They said to me, hey, well, we work with a grant person, we've got a grant written, we just need somebody to work, how we're gonna, fund this, where we're gonna get this money. Huge red flag right there. That's not the way that process is supposed to go. So I said, well, let me take a look at it. They brought it out, nice thick grant instrument. I said, let me take it and read it through, which I did. And whoever wrote it, and I told them when I met with them in the follow, whoever wrote it, great grant writer, excellent job. The budget justification, all of the narratives, fantastic work. Now you won't get this money, but it's fantastic work. And so I was, persona non grata, I'm the bearer of bad news here. And they took it as well as you can possibly take it after having invested, I think, $8,000+ on the writing of this grant. And we kind of stuck a pin in it right there for that night. Some days went by, they called me back. I said, well, we don't understand why, how come we can't get this money? And the best way I could break it down for them at the time was to say, grants actually work. It's like, Pastor, okay, stay with me here now. Grants actually work kind of like credit, right? So if you go out and you get a $5,000 grant, or you get a $5,000 loan, well, now you're going to work, you're going to pay that back over whatever terms. Right. Somebody sees that you've done that. Mm-hmm. Now you can go and apply for $15,000. Yes. And now we're more open to it because when we saw what you did with 5, similar to grants. You get a small grant, couple $1,000, you execute that. Here's our receipts. This is what we did. Oh, this is a great grant report. Cool. Now we want to go for $10,000, $15,000. Well, now you got a track record. You had an award. You executed. You did well. Okay. Well, let's try with this amount of funding, and you build and you grow until now you can apply a couple grants down the line for $100,000+. You get that. Now you're at 6-figure. Now we're off to the races, right? But here's a new nonprofit who didn't have any other grant awards, and the grant that you've put together is a $35 million grant. Wow. Now, whoever wrote the grant for them, I do honest business. I would have told you up front, hey, listen, I can write this for you, but you don't have any grant experience. You don't have any prior awards. You've never done any financial reports. Right. $35 million, having worked in the university environment and so forth, the accounting software that you're going to need to manage that type of money, particularly if you plan on continuing at that level, getting other grants, that may cost you $250,000.
Absolutely.
Do you have that, right? To start, and in addition to that, grants, for the most part, are cost reimbursable instruments. This is another thing we had to have this discussion because, okay, so let's say that you got the $35 million grants over 35 months. That's $1 million a month. Well, in order for you to bill the funder for that money, you got to spend it. So in order to get the reimbursement, so do you have $1 million to start with to even get this going? Right. To get the reimbursement? So once we dealt with the practical realities of grants, particularly of that size,
Right.
then, you know, I was no longer the bad guy. And hey, well, you know, thank you for being honest with us. And now at least we know what we're dealing with and where we'd have to kind of go from here, right? And I saw a lot of that. A lot of people from all walks of life, races, backgrounds, ethnicities, socioeconomic status, didn't matter. From all walks of life who were essentially being taken advantage of because they hear the term grant or nonprofit, they don't really kind of know what that is.
Right.
And I also discovered that, not for nothing, there weren't a whole lot of people out there doing this.
At all.
Not in terms of on the university level or as it relates to larger nonprofits and funders, but for the average mom and pop who might have whatever questions, where are you gonna go?
Well, I think that is a perfect segue into the next question is that what makes the Florida Nonprofit Center the premier agency for nonprofit consultation? So I can answer that myself right now. It's everything you just explained up until this point, at least so far.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what makes the Nonprofit Center your premier resource, I've been in the sector for 2 decades now. So I've seen a lot, experienced a lot, people come and go, etc. I think what differentiates the Nonprofit Center, the experience that I brought to building this agency is a little bit different. It's unique. You would think that, well, grant person is a grant person.
Okay.
And but the more you drill down into that, that's not necessarily the case. You'll find, first of all, there aren't very many, if any, other consulting agencies that specify just in nonprofits. There's a reason for that. The profit margins are very different, and so in order to operate in this space, you gotta love the work, because you know a lot of times you're not necessarily there for the money, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is that, and largely because of that, you'll find if you look, oh, is there somebody over here at an agency? Now they're a lawyer who has perhaps worked for a firm, or they had some clients that had some grants, and they became aware or introduced to nonprofit work and grants that way. Or you have an accountant who's really an accountant, but somewhere along the line, you run into, you know, a couple businesses or whatever, people who have a nonprofit, and you had to do some grant financial reports.
Right.
So you were introduced to it that way. That's how you got to grant administration. And there's a lot of that from a number of different areas. However, I started in business administration, and within a few years of graduating, I was working in grant administration and the nonprofit space. Okay, that's all that I have done over the last 20 some odd years. So I'm not a JD with some experience here or an accountant that has gained some experience. No, this is what I've done. This is what I've specialized in. This is what my focus has been the entirety of that time. So when you go and you're looking for consultation, it's kind of a question you got to answer. Who are you going to go with? You're going to go with an accountant by trade who knows something about grants? Or are you going to go with a person who is founded in and grown in grant administration and a nonprofit space and that landscape, but also has experience in accounting and some of these legal matters and so forth?
Right.
I mean, if you're dealing with a grant, probably want grant expertise.
I believe so. I think one of the things that makes the Florida Nonprofit Center the premier agency is exactly what you said, the uniqueness, because we normally have a disconnect from the university aspect, the federal aspect, and like you said, the accountant that's in the community that is doing the neighbors and the, you know, church and football, you know, little league, you know, things like that. But you're in a position in which you have been doing with the Florida Nonprofit Center is connecting both of those worlds together.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, it actually, it's more than that, it goes beyond that. Things can get really segmented when you're dealing with grants. And oftentimes you'll find someone who says, hey, well, you know, I'm in research and I can go out there and I can find you some grants. Great. But I don't know anything about administration in terms of onboarding and how the accounting is supposed to go and all of that. Okay, well, there's somebody else that worked at a university or wherever, they know about that. So, okay, this person can find it and I can onboard it, but neither of them write. So now you need a grant writer who's gonna write the piece so to whatever this person has found, and now the next person can onboard.
Right.
And now once it's onboarded, if it's a 3, 4, 5 year grant, well, now you've got reporting and financial reporting, programmatic and financial reporting that's gonna go along with that all that time. And none of these people do that part.
Right.
So now you need a grant administrator who's gonna help you with that, who when it comes time for closeout, may or may not have done a closeout depending on whether it's private, state, federal, or what's required. So now you've got 6 or 7 people to execute this, and that becomes cumbersome at best, juggling all of that. And I mean, at the end of the day, the grant is for something. So there's a project that you're actually trying to execute outside of all of that, those dynamics and so forth. So finding all of that in one place is difficult. Yeah, it can be very difficult. And that's what the Nonprofit Center really offers or brings to the table. It's a one-stop shop where, regardless of if you're the mom and pop, or you know you've got your own facility and you've got audits done and you're ready to operate on a federal level, doesn't really matter. Soup to nuts, we've done it all.
Awesome. Awesome.